To you about Mary Newton. Now, most of you will have heard of who her husband, John Newton, wrote the song Amazing Grace. But I want to tell you a little bit about Mary. To start with, just sort of thinking about ourselves, we can often feel like we are ordinary. There's nothing special about me. What would God use with me? What is there about me that is different from others? We can just feel like an ordinary person. And that's probably what Mary felt too, very much so, just ordinary. What is there about me that anyone would want to hear about me after my death, or even actually do anything with me while I'm alive? She was just an ordinary woman. She was born, I'll turn that on, and then we don't know what house she was born in. The visual aids I've got, majority of them are just to give us an idea. They are not true to, so this was not the house where she was born, but it's the style of house that she would most likely have been born in. There is absolutely no pictures of her on the internet or in any books anywhere, because in those days, if you wanted your picture taken, you would have to sit for a portrait to be painted, and you'd have to be a very special or important person or have lots of money. None of those applied to Mary, so we don't have any pictures about what she might have looked like. But Mary was born as Mary Catlett in a middle-class family back in 1729. Now, if you look into some of these things, the dates may appear slightly differently, because during her lifetime, the UK adopted the Georgian calendar. Is that the calendar we've now got? Yeah, Gregorian. Adopted that calendar, and they'd been going from a different one, and it added up like a year and 14 days onto the dating system. So the dates may look like they contradict if you research into it, but I've just gone for the basic dates, sort of as though it was on the Gregorian system. So that's where we are. She was born in early 1729 to George and Elizabeth Catlett. Now, Elizabeth, Mary's mother, had a friend called Elizabeth as well. That friend was Elizabeth Newton. The two Elizabeths spent a lot of time together. Elizabeth Newton often visited Elizabeth Catlett's home, and they were very good friends, even to the point that they had decided, not long after Mary was born, that Elizabeth Newton's son, John, should marry Mary when they were older. They made that pact, they had that idea that they wanted to see fulfilled right from a very young age. Unfortunately, John's mother, Elizabeth, died when he was only 6. He was very young, and she died, and the family lost contact with the Catletts for a time. John's mother had been a Christian. She was a very certain Christian. She was sure of her faith. But his mother was not a Christian. I need to tell you a little bit about John to see how he fits in and how it all works out with Mary. So after John's mother died, when he was just 6 years old, the family had lost contact with the Catletts, and he was sent away to boarding school until he was old enough to go to sea, to actually work on the boats. He was 10 years old when he first went to sea on a boat that may have looked like that. Again, it is not the actual boat, because I cannot get any pictures of the actual things. Something like that was the sort of boat that he would have gone to sea on. John was a very rebellious person. If Derek does get round to doing the talk on John Newton, you will find out just how rebellious. I'm not going to go into it. He was so rebellious that his father was concerned that he was going to do something very stupid, and so made him, applied for him to work in a sugar plantation in Jamaica. Send him away, out of sight, out of mind. That's where John needed to be. He needed to calm down. He needed something solid under his feet. He was about 17 at that time. And so it was all arranged. John was going to go to the sugar plantations in Jamaica. He was going to work there. And then John received this letter from the Catlets, from Elizabeth Catlett, inviting John to come and visit with them just for a couple of days, come and see them, come and renew that friendship that she had once had with the Newton family. So John thought, well, my boat doesn't leave for another 3 days. I can do it. I can get from Liverpool down to Kent, spend a couple of days and then get back up again. That was his thinking. So he went to the Catlett's home, whether it looked like that, we don't know. And he spent 3 weeks there. His ship sailed. He didn't go to Jamaica. He never worked in the sugar plantations. So he missed his boat. But why did he choose to stay so long? Well, he fell in love with Mary, almost at first sight. One of my sources was Brian Edwards in his book, Through Many Dangers, and this is how Brian put it. He said, "The moment the young 17-year-old adventurer gazed upon Mary, his heart was lost." Almost love at first sight. And 20 years later, John wrote about his first meeting of Mary. And he said, again, just a picture for having something different to look at. He said, "Almost at the first sight of this girl, I felt an affection for her which never abated or lost its influence a single moment in my heart. In degree, it equaled all that the writers of romance have imagined. In duration, it was unalterable." John fell in love with Mary right from the word go, right from the start. And this letter that he penned almost 20 years later is just one of many letters that John wrote. He was an avid writer. So because John had missed his opportunity to go to Jamaica, he had to go back to working on ships, to being a sailor. He was as wayward as ever. Nothing had changed other than his love for Mary stopped him doing some ridiculously stupid things. But other than that, he was always the one who was getting punished for having too much leave, for just doing the things that he shouldn't be doing. And he just kept his out-of-control behaviour going. But he will always say that he had that one fixed point in his life, and that was his love for Mary. While he was away, he wrote many letters to Mary. This isn't a picture of what John would look like. Again, we don't know what he looked like in his younger days. But he would write frequently to Mary, sharing his love for her and his wanting to be with her. And while he was at sea, Mary continued to be in Chatham, at home with her family. And whenever John came back to England, whenever his ship docked, he would make his way down to Chatham from Liverpool, which is where he normally docked. He would make his way down and spend some time with the family, often being punished for absent without leave because he wanted to spend more time with Mary and then was late and missed that ship and then had to go on a different one. His only thought was to be with Mary. And we expect that Mary must have reciprocated some of that, because otherwise, why would he have continued? It was in December 1944, so when Mary was just, 15? No, that's not right, is it? Yeah. When she was just 15, I had to look to Carol for that. When she was just 15 was when John requested to marry her. He was so desperate, his heart was so taken that he wanted to marry her. But her father said, no, no way. Look at the way you are living. You are such a tearaway. Why would I let my daughter marry you? No chance. But John didn't give up hope. He thought, okay, well, I will change my ways. I'm going to prove myself. No matter what, he didn't give up. It's noted that he asked Mary numerous times to marry him, but unsurprisingly, she also said no. You can just imagine it, can't you? The fourth or fifth time of John saying, Mary, please marry me. And she's thinking, look, if I marry this sailor, he'll be away at sea most of the year, and he's just incapable of keeping out of trouble. What life would I have? How would that work out? And you can see why. Practically speaking, it just wouldn't work, would it? So she's constantly saying no to him. But he continued to write when he was away, pouring out his love for her. Now, what Mary hadn't realised at that point was that John had changed his way, or was in the process of changing his ways. He had become a Christian, and he was starting to become under the influence of good, solid Christians who would show him the way to live, teach him how to read his Bible, teach him how to change his life. Soon, John would become known not just as a hellraiser sailor, but as a preacher and a pastor. Now, Mary may have been just an ordinary woman, but something extraordinary was happening to John. Mary continued to receive those letters from John, and he was just so besotted with her. He would often address the letters as to my dear Polly, my dearest Polly. Polly was the name that only John used from Mary, as far as I know, and that endearment, that affection that he felt for her. John and Mary did marry, as we know, otherwise I wouldn't have called the title Mary Newton. They did marry when Mary was 21 and John was 25. John was still a very young Christian. He'd only just started out on his journey. And Mary was a churchgoer. She thought she was a Christian. In those days, it was just the done thing. You went to church on Sunday. If you had the money, you would give money in the offering. But that was the done thing. But Christianity didn't feature in your life any other day of the week. It was just church on Sunday. But she thought she was a Christian because that's how she'd been brought up with it. So they got married and they spent about 3 months together before John was given the captaincy of his own slave ship, which he soon embarked on. I'm not going to tell you about all that went on that ship, but while he was away, Mary continued living at her family's home in Chatham. And that's how the first 5 years of their marriage worked out. She was in Chatham, and as soon as he got home from leave, he would come and visit for about a month every year. Mary lived just an ordinary life. That's what it was. She carried on in the ordinary way. Her friends were not Christians. She didn't really think about Christianity that much, other than the letters that John sent her. He wrote frequently, keeping their love alive, but not only about his love, but his hope that one day she would truly understand who Jesus was and make Jesus her saviour. And Mary did say to him, she did write back and say, can you stop being so serious in your letters? And she was starting to get a bit annoyed with all this Christian stuff that John was talking about. In one letter, John wrote, my prayers for you are for your health, peace and satisfaction, but above all, for your progress in religion. Mary didn't like to hear that. But in due time, with that constant reminder of the truth, she did come to follow Jesus. She did see that Jesus was the way forward. He was the bringer of salvation for her. And it was actually Mary who first suggested to John, you know, when we're together, it would be really great to spend some time praying together. John had never thought of doing that, but it was Mary who encouraged him. And it's seen throughout John's life how Mary encouraged him to keep going in his faith and to step out of his comfort zone. Mary expected that she would have a normal life as she carried on living in Kent. She was hoping to have a family of her own. However, John and Mary never actually had any children of their own. Much as they would love to have done, both of them had the hearts to be able to have children, but for God's reasonings, they didn't have any children. John's career at sea was sadly cut short. One time when he was at home in Liverpool, he had a seizure. No one was ever able to find the cause of that seizure, but because of it, they said, he's unfit to sail. You can't carry on anymore. That's it. You've got to do something else. Now, Mary was there at the time, and the shock of seeing John have that seizure and become so ill led to Mary also becoming seriously ill. John never had another fit. He fully recovered and had very good health. But Mary, after that shock, always had what they classed as delicate health. We don't quite understand what it was, but it's often mentioned that she had debilitating headaches, that she was just never up to full strength again. And it was really hard for her. John had to move away for work because obviously he couldn't be a sailor anymore. And Mary was too ill to travel. She stayed at home with her parents looking after her. Mary did continue to grow in her love for Jesus, and she got to know some good, solid Christian people who helped her to grow. And as Mary grew to love Jesus more, she socialised with the people from all different classes, which her family were not very happy about. But she knew it was the right thing to do. It didn't matter whether you were upper class, middle class, or lower class. If you love Jesus, you can be together. And that's the heart that she had, and that really comes out throughout her life. She loved everyone, no matter where they were from. Mary took a bold step to leave her family home and join John in Liverpool, as he was then. And John was studying the scriptures. He felt a call to do something more in sharing God's love. And with the help of Mary and other Christians, he was able to become a minister in a church in Northamptonshire. It was in the parish of Olney in Northamptonshire. Now, as I mentioned before, Mary had grown up in a middle-class family. She'd always had everything she needed. Everything she wanted, it was available. And she's now come to this parish church in Olney, and the people in that parish were very poor. And it was a step down. She wouldn't have those things that were basic amenities to her. She wouldn't have them anymore. But she was willing to do it. Her love for John and her love for the Lord gave her that strength to keep going, to support John in his work that he did. Even when she was unwell, she would encourage her husband to keep going. She wasn't just being there, she was someone that he could talk to. She was an ordinary woman, but she became extraordinary because of her love for Jesus. Mary supported John in the background, entertaining many guests from into the vicarage. She provided a listening ear when her husband was busy preparing the sermon or planning to preach. She was there for anyone who came into the vicarage, a listening ear, and she was also said to be a calming presence, especially for her sometimes dynamic and volatile husband, knowing the background that John had come from. Now, there was another Christian who came into contact with the Newtons, a poet called William Cowper. He suffered with severe depression, and he moved in with the Newtons for them to care for him. He was mentally unstable. He needed constant care. And Mary, even in her frail state, willingly opened up her home to care for John and William together. And John and William worked together. Again, a picture just to give the idea of them working together. They worked together on a hymn book, which was known as Ollantay's Olney hymns. And in that hymn book was one of the most famous hymns that everyone has heard of, Amazing Grace. Now, without the support of Mary, that hymn may not have been written. She supported both William and John through all of their times of difficulties, and she continued to support. William stayed with John and Mary for about 18 months before he felt well enough to return back home again. And then, not long after that, although Mary and John didn't have their own children, they did adopt Mary's two orphaned nieces, 5-year-old Betsy and a little bit later, teenaged Eliza. Mary was about 50 years old by this time when she adopted these children. She still had poor health, but yet she cared for these two nieces, especially for Eliza, who had tuberculosis, the disease that had killed her parents. And Eliza didn't last very long, but yet Mary gave all she could to provide a support for Eliza to make it as comfortable as possible. So things were nice and settled, and then things changed, as they always do. It was time to move from the nice, quiet parish of Olney in Northamptonshire to London, to a church called St Mary's, Woolnoth. I had a quick look, and it's just round the corner from Bank Station. Esther was telling me how she's visited it. I've not been there. That is a picture of it as it would have looked at the time. So a completely different type of situation, completely different social standing as well. Rather than dealing with the poor of Olney, there were a lot more upper class people that Mary would have come into contact with, and she rose to the occasion. She shone for Jesus in the way that she worked, in the way that she supported her husband, in the way that she welcomed so many people into her home. She adapted to that new role and continued to grow in her faith. But Mary's health did continue to deteriorate, and John absolutely dreaded her dying. Mary suffered from breast cancer for the last 2 years of her life. And she died in December of 1790. Her faith had kept her strong, and she was used to help prepare John for her passing away before he was. Through Mary's care and concern, John had been able to flourish and serve throughout her life. John's love for Mary can be seen throughout the letters he wrote to her. John preserved almost every letter he sent to her. And a few years later, after her death in 1793, he published a book called Letters to a Wife. In that book were over 140 letters that he had written to her during their marriage. That's not including the letters that he wrote to her while he was at sea. It's estimated that he wrote more than 200 letters to his wife, plus the little notes that he left around the house for her. It was the way that he showed his love for Mary, and Mary was able to support and help him. These letters, in the Letters to a Wife, detailed their romance and long separations during his seafaring year, and it was a tribute to her influence on his spiritual journey. Mary was an ordinary woman with extraordinary God-given strength. She had a loving family and a very loving husband. She was weak, with frequent illnesses and headaches, yet she was strong to run her house and care for anyone who came into her home. Mary was also a constant encouragement to her husband for him to serve the Lord. This woman was ordinary, but she had an extraordinary God who helped her and strengthened her when she needed it most. Sometimes we may feel weak and ordinary, but that God that helped and strengthened Mary can help and strengthen us if we will accept him as our Saviour, as our helper, who will lead us and guide us each step of the way. Those who know they need a saviour and are willing to follow him will be strengthened by that extraordinary God who worked through an ordinary woman. Thank you very much for coming along. Next month, we'll be meeting on the 7th of September, and it has been entitled Wildfires, the Great Fire of London, which Derek is going to give to us. So thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions?